from your experience, and this is one of the biggest issues that I have, is I really cannot tolerate people who will not serve our country, stand on a front line, and be willing to die for what they believe in, think that they have the right to tell other people that you should go die for this country. I have a very big problem with that. I always have.
I think the lowest form of human behavior, as far as I can tell, is somebody who not only avoided wartime service when they had the wonderful opportunity. One thing I'll tell folks, perhaps it's obvious, is that in every single American war, they were never really turning away volunteers. They certainly weren't for the Iraq and Afghan wars. They certainly weren't for the Vietnam War. The lowest form of human behavior is the Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld behavior. And now, not the only ones. There are plenty of Democrats who do this, which is as many deferments as I can get. Now, Rumsfeld had served to some extent. Cheney was like 7 deferments. Bush, find a way into the National Guard. But it's in the think tanks today, too, left center and right center. The lowest form of human behavior is I'm not going to serve when my number comes up. I'm certainly not going to choose to. And my kids aren't even going to consider it. I'm going to shield them in every way. And then I'm going to be the loudest chicken hawks, we call them, chicken hawk voice for war, whether on the floors of Congress, talking heads in the media, or in the Oval Office, pushing for more war. I mean, if you believe it in a war, go fight it. If you believe in a war, send your kids to it. And to me, that just seems like the simplest thing. And oh, by the way, Tim O'Brien, one of my favorite war authors of the Vietnam War, he's been called a war writer, but he said we should actually change the term war to people killing and just insert that into everything, right? And I think that we really need to reframe what this is. And my goodness, in a different time, as in World War II, there are only 30 less Harvard graduates died than West Point graduates. We're talking 300 plus. How many in the War on Terror? It's a number between 0 and 1. And this is upsetting to me, not because I want more war. I actually want there to be no veterans, so we don't even have to have a Veterans Day anymore. It'd be great if we just gave up that concept and talked about peace, which is a radical act, by the way, to say the word peace anymore. People think you're naive and silly. Meanwhile, it's the most rational thing. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about that. I get fired up about that kind of behavior. Advocating for wars you wouldn't dream of serving in yourself, and you would make sure your kids were shielded from in de facto and de jure ways every time. But someone else, they should go die for your pet ideology.
And that's the interesting thing about Kennedy, going back to Jack, is the fact that he did serve in the Pacific, and his instinct was not to go to war. His instinct was, no, this is not the answer. I can assure you it isn't. I lived it. I read, his the most famous book about his assassination, why he died and why it matters. And, just reading about the portion where, he talks about where they talked about him floating in the Pacific and thinking that he was going to die. And, you can never imagine that it would have evolved and what it evolved into. And then you think about everybody after the fact. You think about, LBJ and Nixon. And then, of course, you do have a president who wasn't looking for an itchy trigger finger in Carter. And then you get Reagan. Look, it's a never-ending cluster for
That's
the
the point.
Conflict. And that's the thing that I think people really need to understand. And that's the thing that I found so disturbing, is that even though a lot of what Trump said during his presidency was BS, he was pretty consistent about saying that war is totally terrible. We don't need to go to war. There's no point in war. And I'm like, okay, well, you know what? Even if he's full of it, he is saying it to over half the country that think he's a god. And they're going to basically take it and say, yeah, war is stupid. We don't need to go to war. Yet if he was saying, we totally got to kill the people, we got to kill all those people, and his followers would have walked right over the edge right with him and said, yeah, we got to kill everybody. That's what we got to do. And so it is kind of scary.
But see, I think we're still doing it. We're just not killing as many of our people. We're just killing other people by drone bombing them. And therefore, there's no body bags and nobody sees it. And that's why no one in this country cares, because it's not affecting them and they don't see it. I think if we had on the ground coverage of what was going on in places like Yemen all the time, 24/7, people living in rubble, fearing for their lives as drones fly over, people would know. I mean, we don't cover that. That's purposefully being not covered.
Look, what changed the Vietnam War right after the Tet Offensive was showing the body bags. they showed the coffins with the American flag draped over it, and that changed everything.
Yeah.
And at that point, it became real, and they're like, "Oh, wow."
Well, that's the thing. I think that's why I think everybody should have to get like rehistory certified, like every 10 years. We should have some.
No, I mean, honestly, look, maybe it's just because of the way that, my grandfather instilled his values in me. I would implement the draft. I just would.
I would start with Congress's family. If you want to start a draft, that's fine. Then I want their kids and grandkids should need to be the first people called. And if then they're willing to do it, then that's fine by me.
Yeah, listen, Abraham Lincoln had his son serve. So as far as I'm concerned, if you really believe in what you're fighting for, and, let's face it, there was a lot of justification to the Civil War. If you are that adamant that we need to be in the Middle East and trying to start a war in Syria or continue what is going on, if you believe so heavily that Russia is a mortal enemy, if China's a mortal enemy, hey, listen, we keep at it, we might blow up the whole world. So it's, it's only a question of, who's going to get pissed off at the wrong time and then just take it way too far. But I really think the area that we need to go to, which I still think is the biggest problem that we have, is obviously the military industrial complex from the standpoint of the weapons manufacturers. They are probably as powerful as anyone on Capitol Hill, at least in terms of foreign policy. I have a friend who was a lieutenant who served in Iraq, in Baghdad. And, I remember reading about a story about how one contractor got $25 million to build a gas station in Baghdad. And I'm thinking, what's he spending? $500,000 on the gas station and pocketing the other $24.5 million? I mean, the scam that defense contractors are running on our country is something that, again, we support the troops 1,000%. But
can't we say the best way to support troops is to not send them to things that kill them for no reason? Maybe that's the best show of respect.
Yes, but there's also there is this misnomer that we have to spend $1 trillion on the military every year. Maybe we need to spend 350 billion. And that may be too much, but I'm using it as an example because so much of the money is basically there to enrich war profiteers. Yeah. Am I wrong about that, Denny? Can you elaborate on that?
I would love to. Okay, like it's hard to even know where to start in this. I mean, I'm gonna allow myself an emotive moment.
That's cool.
In Afghanistan, 3 of my soldiers bled to death waiting for or on a helicopter. All 3 of them had neither of their legs. One of them also didn't have one of their arms. Bled to death waiting to get medevaced out. None of those 3 soldiers, Nick Hensley, Gustavo Rios, Chaz Ray Clark, none of those 3 soldiers made more than $40,000 for that year. And that was with special combat pay and not paying taxes. Let's then look at the compensation for even upper or middle management at Raytheon and Lockheed and the other contractors, or even the mercenaries that got sent over there for a few $100,000 a year to guard the gas station that cost $500,000 but was $25 million in profit. That's an obscenity. That's an obscenity that doesn't get enough attention. I often say on Veterans Day, I'll write in articles, if you want to support veterans, create less of us. That's one thing. And then the last thing I think is, important about the trade-offs. You said, I said the last bipartisan enterprise is war. Actually, I'm wrong. One of the last bipartisan enterprises is the defense budget. And the thing about the defense budget is it's confusing to me the way the universe is. I don't particularly have a science brain. I have a little bit more of a liberal arts, social sciences brain. And to this day, fairly smart guy, I can't get my head around the concept of the fact that the universe is always expanding. I don't know about you, but I'm like, expanding to where? How is it? Like, where does it go to? And maybe that's just my ignorance. But the only other thing in American public life that feels like that is the defense budget. It's always expanding. It's never really contracting in any meaningful way. And I think that we don't talk about the opportunity costs and the trade-offs that are involved in that. We think that because there's no draft and because there's no direct war tax, that war is an abstraction. Hey, now we mostly do with drones. There's not a lot of body bags coming home. Right. It's invisible to us. But actually, war is a kitchen table issue. And I've been trying to say this for a while to anybody who will listen. And one of the ways is all that money that's spent on defense, 50% of our discretionary budget essentially, could be used for a whole lot of other things. Tax cuts if you're a libertarian, or in my case, maybe just a little bit of social services so we can be an actual modern society. Which brings me to advertising. The Department of Defense spends millions and millions of dollars getting corporate advertising consultants to tell them what slogan will get kids to put themselves in the hook for killing and dying potentially on behalf of their country. And they come up with these great slogans, Army of One. If you're a little older like me, you remember, be all that you can be. It even had a jingle.
Okay, I'm older than you, I assure you.
I have a pitch, everybody, and remember I said this, maybe it's my one gem that I'll leave behind. The Department of Defense needs a real, true advertising slogan, and should be this: the Pentagon, this is why we can't have nice things. And I think it gets to that trade-offs of what the defense budget is.
Yeah, I think that's right. We talk about it all the time because whenever we talk about things like Medicare for all or rebuilding our infrastructure or increasing minimum wage or UBI, we always get that, how are you going to pay for it? And I really just started saying, we're going to get the money from the same place the military does. That's what we're going to do. We're going to get, that's going to be our source of money. And so because you don't ask it about that. Nobody asks how you're going to pay for that. And I just think at this point, we need to stop falling for it. We talk a lot about modern monetary theory on this show. And that the truth is we can have everything that we want to have. We really can. And the only reason we don't is because people profit from us not having everything that we can have. So yeah, I find that incredibly frustrating that the military gets that. But one thing I wanted to ask you, and this is something I think about a lot with veterans who are kind of what we call woke and really kind of understand they're not just like, oorah, go, kill everybody overseas. And how do you reconcile being in the military, serving your country? And clearly, I think to me, it's a very important thing. I wish it wasn't abused and misused. How do you reconcile that with, I'm sure, a lot of peers and people that you're around that are very go red, white, and blue?
It is a difficult. So I was not like a courageous whistleblower in the vein of a Daniel Ellsberg or even in a Chelsea Manning. But I did begin to write publicly, published my first book, and then a couple of 100 articles that were overtly anti-war while I was on active duty as a captain and then really as a major at the end of my career. This is not done traditionally. And I don't mean that to sound self-aggrandizing. It's just factually true. I went to West Point. I served in 2 wars. I had taught at West Point. And then, so on paper, I was kind of one of their golden boys to a certain extent. I was, on the upper climbing path. It is a difficult thing to do because you're scared that they'll take your pension, they'll get in trouble. I was under an investigation where I could have lost my pension in retirement. Instead, they offered me kind of an off-ramp because they didn't want to martyr me, I think. So I was very lucky, right? I wasn't courageous in any way. But one of the main reasons it's hard, in kind of an answer to that question, is, you're giving up your identity within the tribe. The military, with the draft going away, became an uber professionalized entity. We've become almost like a Praetorian Guard. Less than 1% are serving on active duty. It's become a family business. In the combat units especially, like in the infantry and the special forces and the recon elements like the cav, like I was in, they don't look like America. My units, and this is statistically true, are disproportionately to the extreme white male from the deep south, mountain west, or the Rust Belt and have a family member in the military. If you pull a black ball soldier out of an infantry unit, that's what he did. So what the problem with this is that it becomes a subculture, an identity, a tribe. We all need that. We need a sense of belonging. And so when you speak out, when you follow your conscience in any sort of public way, you're risking all that. And I'll tell you, it was emotionally trying for me. My best friend stuck with me. I will say this, among my core group of a few hundred veterans that I served with, that I was close with, that are in my phone, right, that I text, I would say about 50%, about 40% of them, this is vague, are hardcore red, white, and blue, angry at all brown people and Muslims, and still all in. 50% of them would never talk about victory and think this was all kind of a farce, but they're pros. They're either pro soldiers or they're just they're out now, but they're apathetic. They're fatalistic about it. And I don't blame them. There's almost like a nihilism to it, like professional mercenary nihilism. And I say this about people I love, where it's I just don't have the emotional energy to speak about this. And then there's really only about 10% that will kind of advocate or speak out for peace. But I think the interesting thing about that statistic, and admittedly it's anecdotal for me, but I think it's a pretty decent sample size, is a large percentage of the veterans of the post 9/11 wars do not believe in them in any real sense. They may not have the woke language, they may not have the sophisticated analysis, but they do know this. And this applies to my soldiers who are Trump supporters, which is most of my enlisted soldiers. They have a vague sense that, like, this was stupid. And that's interesting, because when you look at the Afghanistan war, this has to be the first time in American history this is true. 73% of veterans of the Afghanistan war in a 2020 poll were for full withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was a slightly higher rate than the civilian population. So to be clear, America's warriors were more anti-war than America's civilians in the case of Afghanistan. I can't think of another historical example, and I just wrote a book on the history of the United States. Maybe someone will find it, but I can't think of one. That is a strange thing indeed, and I think it points to a really unhealthy civil-military relationship. And you brought up the draft as, I think, one of the important reasons that has become the case.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.